Good morning again, everyone. Welcome to the Changemakers across sectors track. My name once again is Betty Cruz, and we're going to be here together from now through the afternoon. We have 3 sessions. We'll have a lunch break for about 45 minutes. I love seeing all the connections that's already happening, and we'll have more time for that throughout the day. The Changemakers across sectors track is made possible in part thanks to the John T. Ryan Memorial Fund of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. With that short introduction, I'm excited to welcome back to the stage Sherry Zalika Sykes, our diplomat in residence for this region, and through her work with the State Department. We're really grateful to have Sherry in Pittsburgh. She's already been such a tremendous asset, not just this morning with her amazing remarks, but getting to know her in the short time that she's been here. So I'm grateful to the road ahead. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to do a pause for the mic situation here. We have one mic that wasn't working, this one over here. And once we're set, Sherry, you can take it away.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to cut straight to the chase. We have a panel here today where the bios for everyone are in your packet, so please do take a look at those at time. But we're going to get started with a series of questions that I'm going to ask now to get started understanding what are the change-maker possibilities. Both in your organization and the work you're doing, and then also what are the actions for our audience. And then we'll have a conversation. So please do prepare your questions, prepare your remarks to participate in what we hope will be a conversation. So, to get us started, Joylette, please tell us about the systems change that you're taking and for sustainability, working with CEOs, and tell us about some of the promising practices that various CEOs that you're working with are undertaking.
Okay, all right, out of the gate. So hi everybody again. I'll talk a little bit about our experience with the CEOs of Sustainability, which is the executive network. There are close to 40 CEOs or C-suite regional leaders in the network, along with human representatives from those companies, folks that are actually, making the work happen in a lot of cases. So I would say that, and thank you for the question, and thank you again for being on the panel. I think that one of the most interesting, things that we've done in recent years in collaboration with Sustainable Pittsburgh along with this network has been to work on regional decarbonization at a very broad and strategic scale. Think, okay, how can we operationalize this as a region? What's important? If we've had any stakeholder conversations, many of those in this room are part of those conversations, kind of surface the principles, the actions, how they can be taken across the different sectors. Now, that work resulted in a framework with kind of 3 main priorities, one of which is change at scale. So we go back to that deploy thing. Let's deploy many of the technologies. And let's make sure that we're encouraging as things as possible, continuing to create enabling policies that spur more and more of that. The second piece is meaningful community engagement. We touched on this again in our session quite a bit, that we are kind of entering a new phase where we need to accept that community conversations are part of the way that we do this. That to have that exchange with folks who will be the direct beneficiaries or receive the direct impacts of the action that we're taking are critical. We see that it's embedded in federal legislation, in community benefits agreements, in some of the mechanisms by which these things have to be that they have to be funded and resourced. And then lastly, measurement and accountability. how are we measuring that progress? How are we holding ourselves accountable, not just to the greenhouse gas reduction, but also to that equity piece, to that community engagement piece, and putting that forward as an overall framework for how we can start to think about what the next actions are that they are doing that. So it's maybe a little bit longer an answer, maybe not specific enough, but I will say that the work with CEOs has definitely taught me that top leadership is extremely important, but it's also very important that these leaders are developing, a culture around this within their companies to really embrace these goals and values as part of the way that everybody understands that the business is operating. And that's really important to have that whole company approach.
Thank you, Joylette. Well, Jay, we haven't had a chance to meet you yet. Joylette was present, at the time, and so I did the introduction as folks here haven't had a sense. Jay, please tell us about yourself and your work and how you are participating in the work.
Thank you, Sherry. Thanks everyone for putting on this great event. My name is Werner. I work at the Quincy Institute for Response to Statecraft. It's a think tank based in DC, but I live in Chicago and I work remotely. Let me just to sort of ground my approach to these issues. Let me talk about how I came into climate work some years ago, 15 years ago or so. I was in grad school in Chicago and I was getting involved in community organizing on the south side of Chicago. And the campaign that I helped put together was around increasing transit access on the south side. South side is one of these neighborhoods that many cities in the United States are familiar with. It's not an anchor, it's sort of a massive piece of land that encompasses dozens of neighborhoods. But it has suffered from disinvestment and exclusion in the city. And that means that there is an absence of jobs, access to the parts of the city, an absence of mobility, and a significant share of environmental racism is involved in this. So there's pollution across the south side, former industrial areas. So this campaign was, and I really appreciated the conversation the first panel about equity, because the climate issue is so closely related to the question of inequality. Chicago, like many cities in the U.S., over the last 40 or 50 years, it has experienced economic growth, but the economic growth has been really narrowly distributed. It has led to increasing inequality and it has led to increasing insecurity. But I think it's important to note that insecurity is not just felt by losers in this whole process, it's also felt by winners in this process. And that means that on all sides of these divides, there were so the racial divides, the class divides, the education divides, the geographic divides. On all sides of these divides, people are feeling insecure, and often they work through that insecurity through resentments directed at other groups that they are facing by the problem. And I think the question of equity is so important, not just because it gives people who might otherwise have priorities that are not climate first, it gives them a reason to be brought into the climate plan. But it's also important because it's the inequality and insecurities that American cities are all feeling are a significant obstacle to different groups of people working together on this shared struggle because they can't see common interests. And so I took that lesson of the sort of experience of trying to pursue a very local transit access campaign in Chicago. We did not have a campaign, I'm sorry to say. Although there have been improvements on the train line we were trying to run more often. But we did not really make the campaign. A lot of that has to do with the fact that people who hold power in the city don't make a priority of the interests of people who have been excluded. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that many people in the city, people who do have resources, nonetheless are very insecure in their hold on those resources, and therefore reject the idea that they can help those people who have been excluded from the city. So I learned a lot from taking part in that campaign. And lessons really apply at the global level as well. Because climate is a global issue that is absolutely necessary. It's a global crisis that's going to affect everybody, but if we want to solve it, it's necessary for everyone to get working together, to coordinate and cooperate. And yet, the global economy, just as in American cities, growth over the last 40 or 50 years has been unevenly distributed, and it's increased insecurities. And that has led different countries to increasingly define their interests against each other, to have very difficult times understanding their community interests on things like climate change, and to increasingly pursue computational policies that make it not just hard but impossible to focus the political will and resources and talent that we need to focus on climate change. Because instead, increasingly, countries are moving towards confrontation with those they consider their rivals, and that means channeling political will and resources and talent into militarization, into nationalism, and into periods ultimately into violent conflict. So this is, I think, at an international level, and we see this everywhere, obviously, but my own work focuses on the U.S. and China. The U.S. and China, the U.S. is historically the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. China is today, by wide margin, the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. So these two countries are at the actual core of this solution. But these two countries are also finding it impossible to define, to see that they have community interests on some of these things. Rhetoric aside, the kind of concrete policies that would follow through on the recognition that the climate crisis is a global crisis that is shared by both Chinese and American people, by Chinese people and American people. We're seeing that very hard to materialize, and there's a lot of countervailing forces working against it. So I think that in addition, we absolutely need people focusing on climate, but there's also a set of enabling conditions that will allow us to focus the political resources and talent on the truly existential crisis of climate that's facing humanity, and that risk of diversion. We need people also working to create those enabling conditions. And that, at local level, is about increasing equity, reducing divisions that have grown up over the last decades, and at an international level, it's the same thing. We have to create the possibility for people to recognize their shared interests.
Thank you very much. That was incredibly important. The enabling conditions for us to partner are fundamental to these partnerships, therefore their success. So, Jack, please introduce yourself and talk to us about the venues in which you are exerting leadership.
Hi everybody, I'm really happy to be here in Pittsburgh. My name is McCaslin. I'm a policy advisor on the energy team in the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate's office at the Department of State. Just to kind of run down how this office works and how we're pushing broader global climate action. There's two halves of the office, and one I think we can kind of split it up into messaging and negotiations, and the other is the implementation, actually mobilizing the private sector, finance, to then actually implement what we negotiate, what we agree to, what our messages are. And so I think kind of at its most basic level, especially kind of thinking in an IR context, climate change is a collective action problem. We need tons of different people with lots of different interests to kind of all work towards the same goal. And I think one thing that's important to recognize that even though for me, since I work on climate, and maybe others in this room since we're subject to event out of climate sort of is the everything, it's the end all be all, but that's not true for many people. And I think many people, climate's up there, but when it comes to economic security, when it comes to fiscal security, those things are going to trump climate on kind of a day-to-day basis, even if they are aware intellectually that this is an existential threat. And I think that's one thing I've really learned in this job when you're trying to push countries to do more. You have to meet them where they are. So yes, they might have climate ambitions, but they also have energy security ambitions. They also have energy affordability ambitions. They have development ambitions. And I think one of the jobs of our office, especially representing the United States, one of the most well-resourced countries in the world, both kind of domestically with our innovation ecosystem, our huge recent legislative wins, bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, and just sort of being able to be a leader, is trying to create, like Jake said, these enabling conditions for other countries to not have to sacrifice the development goals for their country goals, or their country goals for the development goals. And so I think as a collective action problem, one thing I really like is building these international coalitions, whether it's with the private sector, even if it's within the U.S. government, because we get to focus just on climate, but there's other offices that have very specific other focuses, and you need to show them why this matters. And I think that's really important, so that when you have a big meeting with lots of different offices, you don't need to convince them all that climate change matters, but you show them how this storage thing will support their objectives too. You show them how we have the technology, we have the financing, we have the policy to achieve your development objectives while also achieving our climate objectives. So I think, yeah, those enabling conditions are really important, and I think America has a really unique position globally to help other people get those enabling conditions. I think we'll maybe come back to this, but I just want to highlight, I didn't really realize how much I've been talking to the private sector in my role. I thought as the part of the U.S. government where you're trying to push other governments forward, I think the private sector is so important to both showing governments what's possible, what are the tools in our toolbox. Not that long ago, we wouldn't have thought grid-scale batteries were a tool in our toolbox. We wouldn't have thought solar panels or wind turbines were a tool in our toolbox, and now they're here. And I just want to kind of note that in the next 10 years, we might have a new set of tools. And I know there's the comment that Dr. Foley made from Drawdown, now is better than new, but we're constantly having new solutions. And so I just think it's kind of an exciting time to see what our toolbox will look like in 10 years. And that even if you don't see a clear solution to something today, just wait until tomorrow.
Thank you. I'd like to, yes, please do.
So a couple things. Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's really important that we are aware of, the importance of innovation in this, even as we push the scale. I mentioned earlier, I think one thing that kind of ties those whole conversations together is this awareness that this is a collective problem, this is a collective action problem to solve, and that only happens when we can figure out how to break down the barriers that have existed so that the conversations can be had in real ways and get everybody kind of working together. As we were talking, I was thinking in my head, just because the divisions are artificial doesn't mean they're not real. We are in this space where both at a global level and at a local level, we need to have conversations with people we have had conversations with, set the table such that all the perspectives are understood, work toward this collective action. And one thing, both in the earlier conversation and in this one, that something to me is that I'm just really happy to be in the time that we're in, where isolation and division continues to grow, so that's something we clearly can identify as something we need to address to get that collective action. But really, that we're actually having the right conversations. I feel like at long last, we're having the right conversations about this, as opposed to a long period of time when it was, change your light bulbs and individual action paradigm to a place where we're understanding the power that humanity has and harness all work in all of the sectors toward these shared goals. And I say goals very specifically because it's not just climate, as we pointed out, there are many other goals that we can drive toward this.
Thank you for that. So speaking of the ways that we come together, years ago we had a strategic dialogue in China. I was a part of strategic dialogues in Beijing, China. What are some of the ways that we can work together with China today and supersede some of the impediments that we put in the way of working today?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Thank you for your service on the dialogues, because all I contact heard is that those dialogues are a frustrating process that nonetheless accomplish really important things. Yeah. That kind of contact where the U.S. and China are working together has almost completely broken down now. That dialogue system that was built up over the course of the Bush and Obama administrations. It was very frustrating, but it was also both achieving real results and stabilizing the relationship in important ways that was entirely torn down by the Trump administration and the Biden administration, with the important exception of the climate office over here, has not been able to reestablish. And there is a very political will to do so, and there's a lot of fear that doing so will expose people to political recriminations. So there is a lot of sort of broad opposition to doing anything constructive with China, a lot of skepticism that anything constructive can be done in China. I think this is quite wrong. Fully acknowledging that there are serious differences between the U.S. and China that we need to work out, that can't just simply be dismissed. I nonetheless think that focusing on the core shared interests that we do have, particularly around climate, but beyond that, around global economic stability, around security of the global trading system, around developments in the global south, which is one of the core strategies we need to pursue if we want to address these divisions. And if we want to really convince people that everyone can grow together, right? I think the core principle for me is we want to pursue inclusive growth. Everyone grows together, nobody else. Right now, the discussions in DC foreign policy circles are largely about how do we exclude our rivals, how do we counter what they want to do. And this is China, but it's also Russia and Iran and others. There's a very sharp sort of punitive approach to American foreign policy that I think has very rarely yielded the outcomes that were promised for it, and has instead led to a lot of strife. So I think that we need to be thinking broadly, sort of globally, and rethinking our approach to foreign policy, that we should be trying to work together on practical shared interests. We don't have to pretend that we agree with other states on everything. But I do think that there are really important shared interests. And one thing, I think very promising approach to this is that China has, in recent years, China has engaged in quite a lot of overseas financing of various development projects, large-scale infrastructure, in particular, building out electricity plants and roads and rails. Much of this is really dirty. It's bad. There's been a big increase in coal production. China itself is actually the worst offender. China has massively increased its coal capacity in recent years. But it also funded coal overseas for many years. It has now stopped that. It no longer funds overseas coal, or it is sort of winding down the wet projects that were being financed. So there has been real progress on Chinese initiatives when it comes to, from my perspective. And there continues to be interest, I think, growing interest within China to support green development financing. This is something that I think that the United States should welcome, should encourage, should try to channel in ways that will increase the transparency and sustainability of these investment projects. Instead, what we see often in DC is people are like, anything China wants to do, it wants to be bad, so we should try to prevent it from happening. China wants to increase its influence in the multilateral development banks through a lot of this financing flow. We need to oppose that. We need to prevent that. Because if China increases its influence, that's going to be contrary to America. I think this is really short-term, misguided, and a reflection of insecurities within the DC foreign policy establishment about American power. I think we need to rethink what American power is and what it can do. It doesn't have to be binary. It doesn't have to be zero-sum. It's something that can grow through the growth of influence of other states that are not necessarily on the same page with us. And so I think there are a lot of a lot of potential places to explore if we can sort of change the overall orientation of the campus as well.
Thank you. So tell me, Jack, we saw COP28 that there was a pivot more strongly toward adaptation. We all know that warming planning demands innovation, and we do as much as we can, as fast as we can. In the meantime, equity and just practicability. And we also focus on adaptation. Can you tell us more about what can be done on adaptation post-COP28?
Yeah, of course. And I think maybe start with talking about what has been done already. And I think early on I talked about there was 2 tracks in my office. We have negotiators who are working on these COP28 outcomes. So Paris Agreement, but then you had Glasgow, Sharm el Sheikh, Dubai, and next year you'll have Baku as well. And I think the work that the U.S. government has done on adaptation is a really good encapsulation of this 2-track approach. So in Glasgow, the U.S. government announced, the whole shebang, the whole Conference of Parties announced a goal to work on global adaptation and have a framework by COP28 in Dubai. So at the same time they announced that, the U.S. also launched PREPARE, which is the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, which is a large interagency U.S. development assistance program to help, I think their goal is 500 million people by 2030 adapt to climate change. So we have this one track where we're, as an entire world, through the COP process, we're going to work on a unified goal. And you have the other track where the United States is saying, and we're just going to start working on this actually implementing now. And so I think there's 3 pillars to adaptation, and it touches on some of what other folks have talked about adaptation. There's information. That's education, but that's also strengthening like technical ability to measure weather patterns and floods and all that sort of thing, and also strengthening early warning systems, which is one of the best ways to mitigate loss of life in climate-induced or climate-worsened natural disasters. Giving people warning so they can get out of there, or get to safety or get out of there, the problem's going to be. The next is capacity building tools and implementation. So that's actually telling people what are the tools you have in your toolbox to adapt. And yes, there's some generalized global tools, but this is really local and going to be very local specific. Every locality has its own different type of problems and adaptation opportunities. So, if you're talking about agricultural, you have different tools around increased crop resilience and that sort of thing. You want to do on the coasts, about flood control, or in rivers or floodplains. And then the most important thing, which is going to be a huge theme of this year's COP in Baku, is money and how you pay for all of this. And I think the government can put forward a lot of that money in development assistance, and they've committed to trying to get to $3 billion by this year, working with Congress, which would be an 8-fold increase in adaptation and programming from 2021. And then the other thing is theme so far of this talk is leveraging the private sector. And the theme of adaptation is you kind of forget about climate change, forget about all of that, and you can just, if you're a business, you can tell that there's a trend of worsening weather events, and if you're a business, you want to protect your business and you want to adapt that. And so there's a real kind of economic rationale for businesses to get more involved. And one thing that this PREPARE program has is call to action to the private sector. And it's asking the private sector to step up and talk about what they're going to do to make their supply chain, to make their business more resilient, to be first movers, to be leaders, to show what's possible. These are very well-resourced companies, and then they can start kind of the learning by doing in a public space that other people can follow. And so I think those are 3 points of what PREPARE does, and it's this kind of 2-pronged approach of raising the collective global floor of what we agree on we have to do, and then actually doing it and raising money.
Thank you. Well, tell us, Joylette, about leaders of change. Who are the leaders in enacting levels of change that are going to make a difference, whether it's at the local level, regional level, or the global level? Can you name some names and tell us about where the leadership is coming from?
That is a really big question, because, well, because it's my belief, and I think, and I hope this is shared, but, in one of the things today, right, is that those levers are kind of everywhere. They're in multiple different spaces, they're in multiple different offices. There is absolutely a number of levers, that we talked about earlier, the advocacy space with the youth activism conversation. But obviously, governmental agencies have a huge impact to play. And certainly our federal government is I think, in an important leadership position right now, with a lot of the enabling policies and enabling conversations or spaces, and what was your exact phrase earlier? The enabling conditions, right, for a lot of these conversations to happen, are starting to happen because of some of that activity, and we're starting to see that then influence how state government is acting and how local government is acting as well in response to some of these additional opportunities. But as you rightly put out, the private sector also has a huge role. There's an enormous amount of innovation and raising of the opportunities. What I didn't say before, but I probably should have put a finer point on it, is that even if costs are very in the very short term, the longer term is something like efficiency, cost savings, and that bottom line, making things pencil is possible for a lot of these improvements in the business. And to the point you just made, I'm remembering an activity we did locally at the 2019 Climate Action Summit with business sector stakeholders around trying to start to evaluate what that climate risk looks like, whether that's a supply chain risk, whether that's a risk to facilities, whether that's a risk to employment, or where employment is sourced. Those conversations are all really important at the same time. The corporate sector does have an important voice there. And then of course, there's the whole NGO community and advocacy takes different forms. It looks like different things in different spaces. But I think having a connectivity to the communities and those voices is also a really important thing. So I feel like there are so many. It's kind of a bit of a little question. I think that it's all of the things that are going to create those enabling conditions. It's corporate leadership, it's government leadership, it's community-based leadership. There are so many different actors that are opening the space and insisting we look at these really vital conversations in an impactful way, as opposed to a cursory way or an abstract way. Because of all of those activities, we have tools now to meet that.
I think it's time for us to transition to our audience and your questions. Our panelists are prepared to take your questions. So, the crews here will facilitate this portion and give the mic to you.
Yes. We are can you hear me? Huh? Oh, sorry. No, it's good. We are foregoing no cards. As Sherry was saying at the start, we want to be active, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll come ahead and do the mic. Great.
question is on confronting the culture of no, I guess that's like an overarching lesson that I've seen I've been in this climate policy space, not that long, but enough that I've seen it from the government side, and in company side, and in NGO side. And I think the biggest challenge I've seen is, as a ambitious person, trying to nudge the status quo, there's always risks associated with you doing that. In a company space, if you're the one annoying person that's constantly trying to push things along, I've seen that negatively impact people, and that there's a risk there. And then in the NGO space and in the government space, there's like right ways to do things, and you have to go through channels, and things move really slow. And if you're too, there's always a right way to do things, and if you're really nudging things along, you can get in hot water. So curious about this, encouraging people, just kind of ways to work around that in all your individual spaces would be interesting to talk about. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start. I think it's well taken. The point is well taken. I think a lot of the work is in creating those enabling conditions, right? And that conversation doesn't just happen between entities. It sometimes happens within entities. So there absolutely, in many cases, there's a champion, within organizations that is trying to direct attention to these topics. I think that something was said earlier about looking for where the intersection of needs and goals is always an important place to start about what the entity is. So basic needs are a consideration, and you want to talk about climate change, let's talk about how those things intersect. You want to talk about, cost savings or budgetary measures, and one which is about climate change, let's talk about where those things intersect. There's always a conversation to be had, I think, that can open the door for creating those enabling conditions. But sometimes it's tough going, sometimes there are there's a significant distance to cover, and that just requires more time and intentional conversation, dialogue, that's like a national scale, or within a small organization or municipal or right? That there has to be deliberate relationship development. I think that more and more in all aspects of my work, certainly, I feel like we're in this very strange time where and it could be, I think exacerbated by the pandemic, certainly, but, we're in this very strange time where we have this idea that we can be isolated and effective, which is not how human beings work. We require collaboration and conversation and dialogue that isn't based in a place of deep insecurity on all sides, right? To be able to accomplish your goals. And building that, I think that trust, that relationship is fundamental to the overcoming the hopelessness and all stuff.
Yeah, I think those, another facet of the effects of insecurity is that it makes people conservative. Because if you're going to take all systems, and you make one step and it costs everything. So part of the resistance to change actually comes from the fact that this insecurity is so deeply seated and felt so powerfully amongst all actors. As someone who sort of comes out of activism and organizing, I would suggest those, there's sort of a dance to be made between the inside and the outside part. People on the inside are never going to be able to be revolutionary, but their ability to affect things on the inside is going to be lot stronger if they can point to turmoil on the outside that is forcing them in that direction. And I think one of the things that I experienced in 20 years ago when I was doing activism in Oregon is that people on the inside very often find themselves as activists. They wanted to separate themselves from activists. They were like, we're the serious people who are on the inside. The activists are the unserious people. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know how games play. They don't know anything about the technical aspects of this question. And so I'm going to gain credibility by showing them. I think that's a real mistake, at least for those on the inside who want to change it. You draw on the power of the pressure outside to make your call for change on the inside, right? And if you're on the inside, you have to be careful how you do this. No question. But you will be stronger if you can show that there is a benefit to those who hold power to making some decisions. That you're going to get something out of this. It's not just a risk with no obstacles. So that would be my suggestion is be in contact with those who are disruptive and who are passionate and who don't like everything they say is a drain of all passion, right? I think there are real fights that we can cross those lines and that can make people on both sides of that side more effective.
Just really quickly, really honest what Sir said was when people say no, you have to understand why they're saying no, and does that mean you can get them to yes, like they're going to become an enthusiastic climate supporter, or maybe all you want them to do is go from no to just like meh, and then they don't actually stand up and say no to something, but they just sit down. So even if you're not creating new advocates, you're getting rid of new barriers. And I think that goes back to this idea that climate isn't everything for everybody. And yes, it's always an issue, but I think it's hard in your day-to-day life to make it a top issue, and you really have to understand, well, what are the other concerns? And kind of from a foreign policy context, Eastern Europe, for example, has really strong energy security concerns right now because of where they used to be getting lots of their energy. And you have to meet them there when you talk about the energy transition. Other places want to industrialize, and where they have lots of coal, and there's a huge local community that relies on coal. And that's where you have to meet them. And I think that's really important. So why are you saying no? Are you saying no because you think your job will be threatened? Well, when we talk about how this will be a just transition, and we'll do workforce training, and we'll address that part of your concern. And so I think just, yes, people say no, but people say no for lots of different reasons, and that shouldn't stop.
More environmentally sustainable land care, which means growing healthy food, landscaping, and care of natural spaces. Almost never mentioned as an opportunity to address climate change and public health, despite the fact that it's the most accessible type of work and it's very impactful, provides immediate, can provide immediate solutions, and it also provides a lot of opportunities for leadership, including to high school students. Why is this given so little attention? Can you comment on how to make it more prominent?
Thank you for that. I certainly know that Statecraft pays quite a bit of attention to resources. But perhaps you want to start?
I can say very briefly, I don't work directly on this, but one of the initiatives launched to get this more in the spotlight and for people to start seeing the different solutions out there is the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, AIM4C, which was launched in partnership with the United Arab Emirates, who obviously has really unique and challenging food security issues, given that they're very arid and they import a lot of food. And that's, a lot of that is, there's tons of different things called innovation sprints, where they pick a specific kind of issue area and they have a leader on it, and they're trying to raise money for specific solutions, whether it's, how to reduce the methane emissions from cattle, how to make agriculture more resilient. And I think, especially in the adaptation context, even though there is a huge mitigation element to agriculture, I think it's most think someone cares less about how emitting their rice is than they do, will my rice survive this flood? And so I think in that context, it's a much more powerful thing to talk about. And energy definitely, it gets a lot most of the attention, but it's also, you know, I think 35 out of 50 gigatons of our emissions are energy. So, and I'm only energy concerned by it.
I would just add to that, I think locally, one of the challenges with that conversation here is the proportion of the regional economy that is agricultural, right? So the agricultural land use conversation is super important, but regionally, if you're looking at where our carbon emissions are coming from, and where our economic clusters are, it can be harder to get that focus. Though I do think that both upstream and downstream, that we have a real conversation on our hands about land use, about agriculture, about food, and I don't have to point any further than I guess Project Raw to kind of go through what some of the solutions are. If you're familiar with how Project Raw works earlier, there are a lot of solutions in there about land use and agriculture things that I think depending on your region are either more or less salient to the conversation about where dollars are going to be placed and where the maximum emissions values.
Hi. So I have two questions. One of them is to Diplomat, and it has to do with how do we make it visible? How, like, I would love for anyone to be able to go about their day and not have any doubt in their minds that their communities and the people who are in charge of things are working and doing things to address climate. And it's still really, you know, I'm looking outside, I don't see anything that's telling me that. So I think that is part of what will help, I suppose. And then, so another question is partly to Jack, partly to Joylette perhaps. This summer is coming. I'm assuming wildfires are coming. My daughter was in the hospital for 3 weeks. That was in New York, but Pittsburgh's just as bad. Where does she go this summer? When we talk about adaptation, who is directing that adaptation? Is it CEOs? Is it the people in those closed areas? Is it the people who are at the front lines? Who's building the places? We talked about, you know, early warnings. Where do people go? We can't even get people out of the cold in our own city streets. So how does that happen? And just sort of to top that all off, how do we decouple fossil fuels from the economy and who's in charge of finding the solutions that will help the most of us? Thanks.
That was, wow, a lot of actual questions. Of course, very sorry to hear about the impacts to you and family personally from all of this. I think when we talk a lot about climate change, but really, I think climate disruption is probably a more accurate term in the impacts that we're seeing, because they are not things that we are prepared for, that we have systems in place to kind of deal with. We talk about adaptation is a very sanitized term for the turmoil, right, that is resulting right now already. To your question about who is designing those solutions, I think that we are very much in the space of playing catch up. So it's all of the actors that you would expect, you know, certainly at the governmental levels, at all levels of government, in different institutional contexts, those are being designed. But it's slow, and I will say that from both my perspective, this role, other perspectives I've had, kind of in this spaces, that we are very much still in a space where a lot of the agencies are expecting the future to look like the past. when doing planning and design, and we need to move away from that as quickly as possible. We need to have planning efforts that are not short-sighted in that way, that are able to understand the implications of where our plan is headed. Let's see, there was a lot in there. I'm trying to remember, there was another key point that I wanted to circle back on. I think maybe it was around, what was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
Visibility and awareness.
Visibility, that's what it was, thank you. And that's hugely important. I think that for a long time, climate has been invisible, right? There's been a long, decades-long period of time, sometimes called climate silence, where nobody was talking about this at the level that it needs to be. Now that we are starting to, I think there are many improvements, but one of the key challenges there is that the solutions and the activities that are happening in many different spaces with many different intensities, many different budget sizes, many different scopes. And so having a unified kind of PR campaign around this is happening, this is real, is a little bit challenging because there's so many different actions. It doesn't mean that they aren't happening, but it doesn't mean that it can be hard to create a soundbite or a marketing campaign around it. And I would love to see that improve something to work on climate communication for a number of years, because I do think that gets at that conversation of people seeing addressing climate change not as a burden that they have to endure, but as an opportunity, as a choice, as a path forward. Because I think that is the real promise.
Anything you wanted to respond, or do we have two more questions?
Yeah, I think, so who's doing this? Who is driving change? There's something relevant from China there because I mentioned earlier that China is one of the worst countries on coal and significant share of the increased emissions last year globally was from decreases in Chinese coal use. That is certainly true. It is also true that China is expanding their clean energy and transition to big vehicles faster than any other Western world. China is not really like the United States, Europe, Japan. Nonetheless, it is channeling resources with extraordinary speed at an extraordinary scale. And there's something to be learned there, I think, because the Chinese leadership is not doing this because they're climate champions. They're not doing this because they're humanitarians. They're doing this because this is Chinese political economy. Things start moving very quickly when they get institutionalized as the way that growth happens. Like when climate gets institutionalized into the form of growth that we have in the rest of the world, it's already there. We have to get it there in the rest of the world, where the rest of the world grows through climate transition. And we should, I don't think we should do it, and I don't think we can do it in the same way that China is doing it, because our institutions are different, and because I very deeply value democracy. But I think we also should recognize that the private sector is not going to do this on its own. It has to be put into the right structure. It has to be embedded within a set of incentives that make profit flow from the transition. And I think that we do that right in a good way, and where we want to have this occur. Private investors and exacerbate some of the inequalities and insecurities that are a serious part of this problem. But there are other ways to do this that don't go there. I think that's where we should be looking at. We should be focusing on how we institutionalize the climate transition into our local economy. Once that happens, we can start to work.
I remember, to that point, I remember the headlines just a few years ago pointing out this very deliberate investment, massive investment in
Yeah, and just a question.
create jobs and economic.
Yes, to create jobs, capture them into the future. These are the real motivations for China to put a number on that. 3/5 of all expansion of solar, wind, and electric vehicles in the world happen in China. China's big population, but it's only about 17–18% of the total population. 60% of the expansion of the energy is happening in this year. So we need to figure out, again, I don't want to do that with China, but we need to look at that as a lesson, and not simply dismiss it as something we can't do.
1 minute, on the decoupling from growth and emissions. I think we're already starting to see that. It's group numbers, but I think that the economy grew 2.5%, emissions went down 1.5% or something in the last year. And by some estimates, per capita GDP emissions are peaked and are going down. Obviously, global population is going up, so that doesn't mean emissions are going down. But I think we're really turning the corner. And globally, clean energy transition investment is starting to, has already kind of been equal with fossil fuel investment over the last 5 years or so, and it's starting to really accelerate. So I think we're starting to see the beginning of this trend, but we're at the beginning.
Just to tag on that, I think that it's really important for us to recognize that in the context of both of these conversations, the largely political conversation about China and U.S. energy policy, down to the lessons I learned in community development work, that it's never enough for us to tamp down the negative, right? We can't just say, okay, we want to stop China from succeeding, right? That's to your earlier, that's what I was hearing from your earlier statements. We have to build our own positive, right? We have to build the positive where we are, and that is the way to lead and to thrive. And it will never come from just simply putting that negative discussion.
I heard you just say we're building the positive where we are, and I'm very interested in the level of conversations that exist between our fossil fuel industries here locally in Pittsburgh and the hospital industry in Pittsburgh. There has to be an amazing conversation by now, after 40 years of living here, between these major industries. So I want to know what you've seen as an example of partnerships between the health industry here in Pittsburgh and the, fossil fuel industries and all of the industries that seem to have more of a power over our public health. And I can't believe that there isn't some kind of a community agreement yet coming out of our health industries that are so strong here in Pittsburgh, countering the narrative with the fossil fuels. By now, after all of these years, what are the priorities specifically in Pittsburgh? What do you see in direct action between these major organizations?
That's a great question. And I think we may have some additional conversations today that might be able to put a finer point on that. I would say that, I'm not aware, I'm not privy to a lot of the conversations happening with fossil fuel-based companies in the healthcare industry. I will say that I do know that the healthcare industry at large is really starting to understand and grapple with in some pretty significant ways their impact from an energy standpoint on the rest of the communities on these issues, and kind of think very deeply about where can we set goals, where can we make progress.
But that's still, really kind of theoretical. I'm asking for direct conversations. Do they exist? Are we at that front yet where there's conversations that exist that you know of? You're the leadership. We've been at this game for over 30 years as activists, and this is the major issue. There's not a push. There's not a power and empowerment. And it doesn't exist, or is that the front we have to work on?
To be specific, are you talking about in terms of the health impacts of?
We know scientifically what the health impacts. The research is done. I've been at this for 30 years. The research is done. The cost of the health impacts. The major industry is, we're all dying slowly from the health impacts of this industry that is polluting the world. We're all sick. So there's an economic drive now in terms of adaptation through the health community. I don't see the powers. I don't see any change now.
So I just wanted to say thank you. You're raising an incredibly important point that needs much more conversation, and we'll continue it throughout. I do want to give the panel a chance to respond to this, and I also want to acknowledge we have other hands in the air, but we're going to wrap up after this and take a break and go into lunch, but we need to continue that piece on public health implications and the broader conversation with Joylette, if you and others want to respond.
Yeah, sure. So, and I think that, again, there will be other conversations happening today, to touch on this more specifically. I think that if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's about why do we see more of a public health frame and push around climate action as it pertains to this linked to sources of pollution that are directly impacting public health. And I will say some of that I think goes back to the earlier conversation about communication and about how these messages are being shared and what we can do to amplify those messages. Public health frame is incredibly important and incredibly powerful and incredibly real, especially here. So I think that there is, as with so many of these things, a lot of room to grow and articulating what those issues are. So I would say I don't specifically know of any campaigns right now that are, pervasive, I would say, that focus on exactly at this front. But it is part of almost all of the conversations that I have about climate impacts in this region. Because air pollution is, largely linked to the sources of air pollution are the same sources of carbon emissions.
Thank you. Let us now thank our panel. This has been wonderful. So thank everyone for participating and attending today. The conversation will continue. As I said, my contacts are outside on the table outside. You will see the bios and ways to contact our panelists in your pockets. So thank you very much, and we'll so much.
Thank you again. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you to our panel. We can give them